They say the stones of Topkapi Palace absorb sin, not by choice but by centuries of necessity. Beneath the embroidered tapestries, the jasmine-scented tiles, and the polished gold latticework lies a darker layer of truth, one that was never written, only whispered. A truth soaked in saffron, sweat, and the quiet weeping of girls who arrived with names and left as shadows. The imperial harem, an opulent prison of more than 400 concubines, was never merely a pleasure house. It was a forge of obsession, a factory of ambition, a graveyard for innocence. Each girl, whether stolen from Hungarian convents, Georgian mountains, or Circassian fields, was taught to dance, to sing, to obey, and most importantly, to disappear. Disappear into silence, into silk, into the will of one man whose gaze determined whether she would dine on jewels or drown in rosewater. In the year 1579, Sultan Murad III sat the peacock throne. His name, to the outside world, was associated with piety and prosperity. But inside the latticework maze of the harem, Murad was a man possessed, not by demons, but by something crueler, an idea. The idea that purity could be extracted through pain. That beauty could be broken into submission. That God himself whispered to him through the screams of girls. He fathered over 100 children, though few lived past infancy. He visited new concubines nightly, never the same twice. But then came Zeynep. Her name meant ornament of the father, though she had no father left. No mother. She was pale as morning fog, with eyes the color of dead olives, and unlike the others, she never bowed her head. When brought before the Sultan, she neither cried nor smiled. She simply stood as though she had been waiting there for centuries. Murad returned to her again the next night, and the next. His hunger became ritual. He banned others from her chamber. The palace buzzed with fear. To be favored was to be envied, but to be envied was to be condemned. The first sign came when a musician was executed for playing a lute melody Zeynep once hummed. The second, when her chambermaid was flayed for wearing her discarded silk, and then came the mirrors. Murad ordered all mirrors in her wings smashed, claiming her reflection multiplied and whispered in tongues. The eunuchs found broken glass under their pillows, the fragments arranged in the shape of open eyes. Dr. Maimed, the harem physician, left one chilling note: "The girl is an absence, she does not bleed. Her pulse flutters like a bird's and vanishes when she sleeps." Soon after writing this, he drowned in a ceremonial pool face down, his fingernails embedded in the marble. Murad changed. He no longer prayed. He no longer bathed. He spoke to empty rooms, calling Zeynep his mirror of judgment. He constructed for her a hidden suite beneath the palace, reachable only by a narrow passage guarded by deaf-mute eunuchs with scorched lips. Inside, there were no windows, only velvet walls, a copper bed, and cages for doves, all blind. Why blind doves? The harem whispered that Zeynep's voice could drive birds mad. That once she sang in the courtyard and 3 crows plummeted from the sky, eyes bleeding. Murad believed she was half angel, half jinn, so he commissioned Persian astrologers to examine her aura. All 7 of them went blind within a week, and yet he could not stop himself. He visited her chamber alone nightly. What he did there, no one knows. But his body changed. He grew thin, brittle, his skin flaking like old parchment. The Grand Vizier begged him to abandon her. Murad answered by having his tongue removed and buried beneath Zeynep's room. Then the sickness began. Concubines began wasting away, not from poison, but from dreams. They screamed in their sleep, speaking in her voice. Some claimed they were Zeynep. Others claimed she had entered them. 10 girls leapt from balconies into the marble courtyards below. One carved her own womb with a gold hairpin, muttering, "No more seeds." The Valide Sultan, Murad's mother and former ruler of the harem, tried to banish Zeynep. She summoned the palace exorcist, who lit incense and recited forbidden verses from the Book of Solomon. Zeynep sat calmly through it all, then asked, "Would you like to see your own birth?" That night, the Valide Sultan went mad, stuffing feathers into her mouth and attempting to fly from the tower. She survived, but never spoke again. Historians today deny Zeynep ever existed. There are no portraits, no official records. Yet in the oldest section of Topkapi, in a wall behind the Sultan's bedchamber, restorers once found a hidden mural, painted not with pigment, but with human blood. It shows a girl seated on a throne of ribs, her mouth open, and inside it, the silhouette of Murad himself, small, naked, and weeping. No explanation was given. And still, every year on the night of Murad's death, the guards say the palace air thickens. The birds fall silent. A girl in pale silk is seen walking the courtyards, her eyes empty, her feet bloodless. She enters locked doors. She sings without sound. And in the morning, one flower, always a black tulip, blooms in the courtyard where no seed was planted. They pluck it, burn it, and wait again for next year. The year was 1580, and the palace began to rot from within. Not the stone nor the marble, they gleamed as ever beneath the Ottoman sun, but something intangible. A kind of invisible mildew crept through the arches and silk corridors, softening the will of men, loosening the sanity of women. Servants whispered that the call to prayer echoed differently now, as if muffled, as if the muezzin's voice passed through a veil of weeping before reaching the minarets. Sultan Murad no longer received foreign ambassadors in daylight. He only emerged at dusk, shrouded in black, his fingers stained with ash, his tongue thick with honeyed opium. He was thinner now, barely a shadow of the lion who once led armies. His physicians wept in secret, for what could they say? That the ruler of Islam's greatest empire was possessed by a woman who never blinked. Zeynep remained in her secret chamber, though remained is perhaps the wrong word. Some said she no longer needed walls, that she had become scent, shadow, suggestion. Eunuchs claimed to see her reflection where there was no glass. Once, a concubine saw her face in the surface of the sultan's tea and went blind before it cooled. The girls tried to forget her. They sang louder, laughed harder, painted their faces with more blush. But fear leaked from the stones. Some began marking their thighs with ash, inscribing protective verses. Others slit the webbing between their fingers, claiming pain distracted her presence. One girl swallowed 3 pearls whole in a desperate act of defiance. She died in silence, her stomach burst, her eyes turned to salt. The palace astrologers, once dismissed as entertainers, were now brought forth with trembling reverence. They studied Zeynep's birth chart, trying to trace her essence. But her origins remained shrouded, no exact date, no known region. One suggested she had no natal chart because she was born during an eclipse between 2 breaths. He was executed the next morning, his organs arranged into a circle around the fountain of the virgins. Then came the feast of the crescent moon, a celebration of life, fertility, and the might of the empire. The harem prepared dances, silk banners, trays of candied rose petals. The sultan requested a performance from the untouched ones, girls who had never yet been summoned to his bed. 7 were chosen. All had been born under different stars, trained in music and obedience, untouched by desire or defilement. Zeynep watched from a hidden archway, face cloaked in gauze. No one saw her enter. No one saw her leave. But as the girls began their dance barefoot upon a mirrored floor, a sound unlike music filled the air. Not a note, not a voice, but a vibration, like a single string drawn across the spine of the world. All 7 girls began to bleed, not from their wombs, but from their eyes. The mirrors cracked, the floor split. One girl convulsed and screamed, "She is inside," before collapsing. The others fell like marionettes, eyes rolled to white, tongues cleft in 2 as if by invisible blades. The feast ended in blood and silence. That night, Murad entered Zeynep's chamber for the last time. Witnesses say he was barefoot, weeping, carrying nothing but a silver bowl filled with milk and crushed myrrh. He remained inside for 3 days. No food, no light, no sound. When he emerged, he was naked, his hair shaved and his left hand blackened as though from frostbite. He said nothing, not to his viziers, not to his sons, not even to Allah. He sealed the chamber behind him with molten lead. But the silence did not last. Within weeks, the empire felt the tremors. In distant provinces, strange plagues bloomed. Women miscarried in clusters. Men dreamed of a pale girl whispering in forgotten languages. The Janissaries grew restless, claiming the Sultan had been replaced. They whispered that Zeynep was no concubine, but a golem of desire, crafted in some Persian fire pit from the limbs of dead queens. The Grand Mufti issued a fatwa declaring her a myth, a poisoned thought. but thoughts have teeth. In the months that followed, 3 more concubines disappeared. Their rooms found empty, their beds still warm, one left behind a single word scratched into the wall with a fingernail, home. Another left no trace, only a faint perfume lingering in her doorway, said to smell like jasmine soaked in blood. And still, Murad refused to speak of her. He grew increasingly reclusive, praying to no one, staring for hours at a blank wall. He refused all women. Even his favorite daughter, Fatma, was denied entry. One day she defied his orders and visited him anyway. She found him crouched before a silver mirror, rocking gently, whispering, "I see her in every face, even yours." Fatma left in silence. She never bore children. She never married. In secret corners of the harem, the concubines began telling stories, fairy tales dressed in silk, about a queen who could turn men to ash with a kiss, who drank the memories of the living, whose womb birthed silence. They sang lullabies to her. They offered her pomegranate seeds. Some even claimed to love her, because fear, when worn too long, becomes worship. And Zeynep, she never returned, or perhaps she never left. Some say her chamber remains, buried beneath newer wings, sealed behind centuries of stone. Others claim the lead cracked years ago, and she now wanders, no longer woman, no longer human, simply presence. They say if you walk Topkapi's corridors at night and catch the scent of something both sweet and rotten, you must not turn, you must not speak her name. For names are invitations, and some doors, once opened, never close again. Years passed, decades twisted by the hand of time like parchment left in fire. Sultan Murad III died in his bed, bloated and pale, his mouth frozen mid-whisper. His son, maimed Roman III, ascended the throne with trembling hands and the heavy weight of a poisoned legacy. The whispers surrounding Zeynep had not faded, they had fermented. What once was fear had become myth. And myth, when soaked in blood long enough, becomes prophecy. Maimed was no stranger to horror. Upon his coronation, he ordered the execution of his 19 half-brothers, strangled with silken cords in the palace cellars before their eyes could widen. It was said he stood watch as the bodies were dragged through the corridors, their purple tongues still twitching. He ruled as his father had, with trembling devotion and unpredictable violence. But unlike Murad, Maimed remembered Zeynep, not as a woman, but as a stain. He had seen her once when he was a child, peeking through a gap in the carved harem doors. She sat on the edge of a copper basin, combing her hair with fingers tipped in silver. She looked up not toward him, but through him, and he felt something rupture inside his mind. For weeks afterward, he bled from the ears and dreamed of tunnels filled with mirrors that showed only his death. His first decree as sultan was to locate the sealed chamber beneath the harem, the room where his father had last entered, and from which he emerged unmade. The architects denied its existence. The palace historians burned their maps, but Maimed was relentless. He believed that if he could find the source of the rot, he could expel it, as if exorcising the ghost of his own blood. The search took 2 years. Walls were knocked down. Floors torn open. Hundreds of years of marble and mosaics destroyed in the name of something older. Finally, beneath the imperial baths, behind a wall of salt bricks and scorched ivory, they found a narrow spiral staircase, descending into breathless dark. Only one man was sent down. His name was Yusuf, mute from birth, chosen for his silence. He carried a lantern and a talisman wrapped in deer hide. When he returned, hours later, his hair had turned completely white. His eyes were crossed and bleeding, and he wept without sound. He drew a single image in charcoal on the wall before collapsing, a tree growing upside down, its roots bearing teeth. After that, Maimed ordered the passage sealed again, this time with molten bronze and prayers whispered backwards. But it was too late. Something had been disturbed. The women in the harem began changing. Slowly, subtly, their laughter fell out of rhythm. Their eyes no longer blinked in unison. One concubine was found standing motionless in a fountain at dawn, hands folded, skin pruned like old fruit, claiming to be the bride of the room below. She was confined. The next night her cell was empty, though the iron bars remained unmoved. In her place lay a pool of salt and a single tooth, carved impossibly from ivory. The eunuchs grew restless. 2 vanished without a trace. One was found with his tongue nailed to the inside of his own ribcage, body folded into a prayer shape no bone should allow. The harem girls stopped singing. They painted their faces black and white like mourning masks. When asked why, one replied, "So she won't see me." But who was she? Zeynep or something older? Whispers spread of a name never written, Al-Kharitha, the mapmaker, the serpent of origins, the first desire. Some claimed Zeynep had only been a vessel, that Murad III, in his lust and superstition, had not conjured her but opened her. And what came out wore her skin like a veil. Maimed forbade all mention of her. He had anyone who whispered the name drowned in the Bosphorus with a lead coin on the tongue. Still, the stories returned, as they always do. A Greek chambermaid reported hearing humming beneath her bed, as if the floorboards breathed. An elderly cook collapsed after seeing a hand reach out of a boiling pot, its fingers slender, its nails made of opal. In the royal archives, books began rotting from the center outward, their ink running like tears. One manuscript, when opened, had every page replaced by a mirror, and every mirror reflected only the reader's corpse. Maimed turned to mystics. Dervishes whirled in fire-lit rooms, praying for severance from the unseen. One Sufi claimed the palace itself was pregnant with her, and the walls were beginning to swell. He was hanged at sunrise, but not before muttering, "You cannot seal what was never born." Desperate, maimed summoned the veiled order, a secret circle of women scholars from Alexandria, said to preserve the names of the nameless. They examined the palace, taking no notes, whispering only in forgotten dialects of Aramaic. After 3 days, they left without ceremony. Their leader, an old woman blind in both eyes, said only, "She is not one, she is many, she is memory misremembered." And then the harem fell silent, not with the stillness of peace, but the hush before collapse. Girls stopped speaking. They moved only when summoned. They wept without tears. Maimed, driven to paranoia, stopped sleeping in the palace. He took refuge in a stone tower across the Bosphorus, surrounded by guards and incense and iron amulets. But she followed. One night the guards heard a song, low, unearthly, filled with vowels that did not belong to any living tongue. They entered the tower and found Maimed curled in the corner, laughing and bleeding from the gums. On the wall behind him, scratched into the stone, were the words, "The mirror is not outside, it is the womb." He reigned 5 more years, but never again appeared in public. When he died, his tongue had turned black, and his final breath smelled not of age or disease, but of jasmine. After Sultan Maimed III's death, a quiet fear lingered in the harem, not the sharp fear of blade or poison, but the damp, bone-deep dread that lives in silence. Servants still swept the hallways, concubines still painted their lips with crushed hibiscus, and eunuchs still polished the golden lattice of the sultan's chambers. But everything was mimicry, like a play performed by ghosts. The harem no longer belonged to any man, not truly. It belonged to something older than the dynasty, older than faith, older than the palace itself. The stones whispered not in Turkish, not in Arabic, but in a language born in the lungs of dreaming serpents. The sultans came and went, each leaving behind a trail of silk and blood, but none dared speak her name. Not Zeynep, not Al-Kharitha, simply her. By the time of Sultan Ahmed I, the palace had grown cautious. The lower chambers were sealed, mirrors were banned. The old section of the harem where Zeynep had once slept was abandoned altogether. Cats refused to enter, candles would not burn, one wall wept water for 7 years straight, no source was ever found. Ahmed, young and deeply pious, hoped to purify the palace through faith. He built mosques, recited prayers daily, and kept only a handful of concubines, but even he could not avoid the infection. His favorite, a Ukrainian girl named Anastasia, later called Kursum, was known for her intelligence, her cunning, and her sleeplessness. She claimed dreams were dangerous, that they opened doors better left locked. She had never seen Zeynep, but she felt her. In her journals, which survive only in fragments smuggled to Venice, Kursum described a presence in the palace that moved without sound. She referred to it as the second breath, the thing that exhales when all others have gone still. She wrote, "Sometimes I speak words I do not understand. Sometimes I look into the eyes of a concubine and see myself speaking back." She banned lullabies from the harem. She ordered any girl who claimed visions to be marked, not punished, but inked with protective verses along the spine. When asked why the spine, she replied, "Because that's where she enters." And yet the marks did little. One night, a young concubine named Lael was found suspended from the rafters, not hanged, but floating, her limbs rigid, her eyes wide and rolled backward. She was humming, though no one could place the melody. It shifted constantly, like a song remembered from another life. She remained like that for 3 days before falling, stone dead, onto the marble floor. There was no bruise, only a single word carved into her chest with a needle: Mother.
The Janissaries, ever superstitious, refused to guard the harem past sundown. They said shadows lingered too long in that place. That footsteps echoed twice. That sometimes a girl would pass, one they didn't recognize, and when asked her name, she'd reply, "Which one do you need?" The palace brought in imams, scholars, even Christian mystics in secret. No one had answers, only stories. One Coptic monk spoke of Lilith. A Jewish rabbi mentioned Lamashtu. A Persian sorcerer swore it was Nasnas, a half-formed jinn who mimics the living and consumes memory, but none fit. The presence in the palace was not malevolent in the traditional sense. It did not kill out of rage, it unmade, it hollowed, and it was patient. By the mid-1600s, the stories became ritual. Every new concubine was taught 3 things upon arrival: never sleep facing mirrors, never bleed into the bathwater, and never say your name twice in the dark. They were told these rules without explanation, but the older girls obeyed without question. One girl, Layla, asked why. She vanished a week later. Her bed remained warm for hours after she disappeared. Her necklace, a small silver coin from her childhood, was found embedded in the ceiling above her pillow. No ladder could reach it. Outside the palace, the empire began to crumble. Territories rebelled, trade slowed. The sultans grew weaker, more withdrawn. Some blamed political corruption, others saw the rot as divine punishment. But inside the palace, the women knew. The heart of the Ottoman Empire had always been the harem, the womb of its rulers, the engine of its lineage, and that womb had been claimed by something older than blood. In the reign of Sultan Ibrahim I, known later as Ibrahim the Mad, the harem descended into full delirium. Ibrahim, tormented by visions, developed an obsession with concubines who resembled Zeynep. He ordered hundreds of women brought to the palace, each paler than the last, each quieter, each with darker eyes. He drowned those who did not please him in the Bosphorus. He swaddled those who did in furs and hid them in locked rooms, whispering to them through keyholes. One chamber, found after his death, contained a bed made entirely of mirrors and a cradle filled with lamb bones. On the walls were written phrases in blood and rosewater. She forgives nothing. She was first. The womb remembers. When Ibrahim was finally dethroned and executed, the court tried to erase these things. They burned the linens. They rebuilt the rooms. But fire cannot cauterize memory. The women of the harem continued to feel her, not just in dreams, but in the rhythm of their hearts, the silences between prayers, the scent of rotting jasmine that bloomed where no flower had ever grown. Some say she was never a woman, that she was history itself, the forgotten, the silenced, the buried alive. Others believe she was merely the consequence of cruelty, a spirit born of the tears of 1,000 unnamed girls. But the most terrifying belief, whispered only once and never again, was this: that she was waiting, waiting to be born, truly born, not in shadow but in flesh. That the empire, with all its harems and rituals, had been preparing her vessel for centuries. That one day she would no longer need to haunt the mirrors, because she would be behind your eyes. And when that day comes, they say the palace walls will bleed, the stones will crumble, and every name, every sultan, every girl, every eunuch, every voice will be replaced by one word: hers.